This coming weekend is a very big weekend up at Balmoral because it's the very first time, in fact, that this spectacular occasion will be hosted by His Majesty the King. If you think about it, this time last year, thankfully, our wonderful monarch was still with us, even though she was pulling back on a lot of those duties that she'd come to be in charge of for so many years. But this coming weekend, for the very first time, King Charles will welcome the sitting British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and his wife to Balmoral. But will this all be plain sailing? As ever, let me explain. Hi, good morning. Neil Sean here in the very heart of London, and as ever, nice to have your company. By the way, here's an interesting fact that literally happened around this period in 1939. On this particular morning, this was an absolute true first, because on this particular morning, way back in 1939, the British Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain, had word that Nazi party, the Nazi Germany party, had in fact invaded Poland, amongst other things. Now, the reason behind why this was quite an historical event, not just because of that significant move, but also it was the very first time that His Majesty the King, King George, actually went to Downing Street at 6 a.m. And the reason why he went to Downing Street was Mr. Neville Chamberlain, the sitting British Prime Minister, had to be by his phone. That's exactly how difficult communications were back then. And that is an historical first. Amazing to think, isn't it? You know, what all went on under the cloak and dagger, even back then. Back as ever, though, to the breaking roll story of the day. As I say, this is big news, really, when you think about it, because obviously in the last year, we could safely say that King Charles has already seen two sitting British Prime Ministers. It started with Liz Truss, and then very quickly evaporated to become the current British Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak. Now, every Prime Minister every summer gets a personal invite by the sitting monarch up to Balmoral. This all started way back during Queen Victoria's time. She didn't want to break into her holiday to return back to London. Why should she? So they kept on that tradition. Now, a lot of people didn't exactly enjoy going to Balmoral because, first and foremost, they found it a little bit tedious. And in the case of the Right Honourable Margaret Thatcher, she didn't like to be away from work too long. Even though she said she enjoyed the scenery, the splendour, the food and the company, she felt a little bit cut off. So what about Rishi Sunak? So what can Rishi Sunak expect upon that delivery back, of course, to Balmoral? Well, according to a very well-placed source, basically the chat unfolds all about exactly what his plans are for the next year or so. As we know, we're gearing towards a general election at some point in 2024. But is it a pleasurable experience? Well, as I say, this will be the very first time that Rishi Sunak, alongside his wife, has actually been to Balmoral. And apparently they're going to be taking in the traditional Highland Games, something to look forward to. Normally, of course, many sitting British Prime Ministers detail this very, very special visit in their memoirs once out of office. Some might suggest that Tony Blair wasn't exactly, well, shall we say, very delicate in dealing about his personal times going to Balmoral. Of course, His Majesty the King is hoping for something totally different this time around for the more, shall we say, easygoing Rishi Sunak. As ever, when I know more, you'll know more. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.